Hello, everyone. We are now back for part 6 of this deposition transcript. I did have a flick through to see where the actual transcript of the deposition itself ended, and it's actually around page 90 of this filing. So the rest of it is all, where like an index of where you can find certain terms within the transcript. That's what the other sort of 80 or 90 pages are. So there's actually not as much of this left now, another 40, less than 40 pages. So I'm thinking that I may get through this in 3 or 4 more videos, which is great news. So we finished up at the bottom here. We finished up there yesterday. So this was Meryl Governski asking the question. So I'm just going to go over the question again so then we can lead into the answer. Okay. So you mentioned statistical significance, and there is a 1096 standard deviation. What does that mean? So it is outside of the normal baseline amount. What does specifically the 1096 standard deviation mean? So I'm looking at the 1191 items per month, and that means it's extraordinarily statistically significant. So what specific data points did you use to determine that? I'm sorry. What specific data points did you use to determine the standard deviation? So I looked at the baseline period, which we already talked about, and the overall activity across all of the platforms combined. Okay, and did you use monthly or daily data for those 3 months? That's monthly data. So why did you use monthly data? Monthly data looks at things that like the dupes. It looks at some smoothing out. It removes usually oddities that come in on a daily basis. It's normally smoother and cleaner data than looking at a daily. What if though the daily aberrations were important? So daily wouldn't make a statistical significance looking at it daily or monthly, because the monthly is still just looking at an average of the dailies. So you're not going to get massive skews one way or the other going from daily or monthly. Did you try it? I didn't need to, because I know that looking at daily and looking at monthly, the same argument could be made. Why didn't I look at it yearly or quarterly? There is smoothing of the overall data, looking at it on a monthly basis versus a daily. So if you were only looking at 3 months, May, June, and July, you had 3 data points that you went into this analysis. I had 3 months that I went into it. Right. So that's 3 data points that you entered in order to reach your conclusion, right? A data point from each month, an average from each month. It's an aggregate that rolls up into a monthly data point. And so isn't a standard deviation so close to the number indicative that the underlying data is variable? I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Isn't a standard deviation this high and this close to the total number of items indicative of variable data? Objection. No would be my answer. It's indicative that there is a very high, I'm trying not to use the word deviation. There's a very high variance between the baseline and the output of the data. So what does that mean? Because we're trying to look at the baseline. Right. In this case, it's showing that the baseline is higher for those particular terms than, for instance, some other celebrity terms that you may identify. So in general, Lively starts at a higher baseline when compared to arguably other celebrities, actors, actresses. But you didn't disclose baselines for other actors or actresses. No, I didn't. Objection. Because I didn't need to. Oh, sorry. Oh, I thought Kevin said something. Fritz, I did. I just noted my objection. You can answer. Because I didn't need to. That's, again, based on my knowledge of actually working with celebrities across social media and tracking individuals, whether they are brands or people. How many times have you run a standard deviation before? How many times have I done the calculation? Numerous. In the course of your career, how many times? Over 25 years, I can't give you a number. Is it part of your day-to-day work? It was part of my prior day-to-day work, yes. Prior meaning at Meta, Ipsos, at Nielsen, which are all market research companies. And again, market research standard deviation is a key element of doing massive research initiatives. And when you analyzed August 2024, you described that as a spike. Why did you use those words, or that word, spike? I used that word because you have to look at a larger set of data across multiple months. And if something goes up dramatically, I would call that a spike. In fact, you've used the word extraordinary to describe the August 2024 spike, right? I'm not sure if that's the actual word I used, but I will say yes, this was a significant spike. Okay, well, let's go to opinion 2 of your report, which is paragraph 169. Yes. Okay, and if you can look at opinion 2, you say, and she reads, the 4.9 statistical deviation, while extraordinarily, reflects organic news-driven interest rather than manipulated manipulation. Do you see that? I do see that. Okay, so what were you describing as extraordinary there? The fact that it is an extreme spike. Okay, so would you describe the spike as extraordinary? Objection. Yes, that's how I used the term there. Okay, what are the temporal patterns? So temporal patterns could be a myriad of different things, but basically it's looking at the overall volume of something in order to understand if there is an observable irregularity. Okay, are timing signatures the same thing as temporal patterns? Timing signatures offer inputs into offers inputs into temporal patterns. If something occurs, like over time, as part of a norm, then something that would be an irregularity around timing would be everyone else. Let's say in a city posts around this time. So we see spikes outside of this time frame, which is an irregularity. Okay, and we talked about the 5 platforms that you looked at: Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Reddit, and TikTok. How did you pick those 5 platforms? I love that Meryl Governski is still calling X Twitter. And I'm not saying most people don't, but it's, that she's not referring to X here. And this deposition was only this month. They are the 5 major social media platforms across the US. Did you do any research to determine whether there are any allegations that the defendants specifically used those 5 platforms? No. So if it turns out that the defendants only used, say, one of the platforms, how would your analysis change? I'm sorry, just repeat that once more. If it turns out that the defendants only used one of these platforms, how would your analysis change? My analysis wouldn't change based on that assumption. Why not? So what I did was analyze real-life data. So I looked at 5 different sites specifically to detect any patterns, because in order to have something be manipulative, there needs to be scale, as in one form factor, especially for social media. So looking at 5 different platforms instead of 2 or 3 gives additional contextualization to understand if there is any oddities that we see in one network, 2 networks, 3 networks. Looking across 5 allows us just better analysis. Okay. You reviewed 2,039 items on Twitter, 16,000 items on YouTube, 6,000 on Instagram, 879 on Reddit, and 688 on TikTok. Is that right? I believe those numbers are correct, yes. Okay. So what if the only smear campaign were on Reddit and TikTok? Objection. How would your analysis be the same when you are including so many more items from the other platforms? So sorry. I had to think about what you were asking. So if I'm looking at several different platforms, I analyze those platforms first individually and then part of the collective. So that's why I provide a meta-analysis as well as an individual analysis across each of the platforms. So if something was an oddity across one or two platforms, then that would come up in the data itself that was analyzed. Okay, so you use the term meta-analysis. What does that term mean? It's an aggregate across all the platforms. Okay, and who is that a term of art in your industry? Is it a term of art? Does it mean something specific in your industry? Meta-analysis usually just means it's a high-level analysis across whatever you're looking at examining. So across what in particular? In this case, it's across 5 platforms. Okay, and when you described earlier that your methodology was sound and rooted in academia, is that a meta-analysis that you were talking about? So yes, looking at an aggregate is done in academia as well as in practice. So you look at different social media networks individually, and then in order to do a larger analysis at the aggregate scale, you would then, and maybe folks would call it different things, but it's called meta-analysis most of the time that I've interacted with it, whether again in academia or as a practitioner. Do you know who Professor Jean Glass is? I don't think so. Have you ever heard of Professor Jean Glass? Objection. The name sounds familiar, but I don't know. It's not something that comes to mind, no. Okay, my colleague will mark what will be Exhibit 7. Am I up to 7? The stenographer says, yes, you are. Let me know when it's in there, and then we'll share it on the screen. I've downloaded it. Okay, great. Oh my gosh, my computer just turned off. Okay, if you can look at, I'm sorry, I'm having some technical issues. I'm sorry, I'm back. If you look at the screen it discusses the definition of meta-analysis. Do you see that? I do. From Carl Pearson, yes. Yep, and it says Jean Glass coined the term in 1976. Do you see that? Yes. So when you use the term meta-analysis, is this the meta-analysis that you're talking about for its subjects? Which is fair, because she's already said she doesn't know who Jean Glass is. And the fact that she uses a term, she does not need to know, she does not have to have knowledge of the person who coined the term. Right. So when you use the term meta-analysis, is this the meta-analysis that you're talking about? Objection. So let me see how they're describing it here. But several independent studies considered to be combinable. Yes. At a high level, this would be the definition. So looking at doing different analysis and having them be able to be aggregated. Okay, but what you just read said a meta-analysis is a statistical method that integrates the results of several independent studies considered to be combinable. So what independent studies analyzing whether there was a coordinated campaign did you integrate? So that specific definition, I'm assuming in 1976 when it was coined, probably meant a very specific thing. The way that meta-analysis are used currently, literally from, I would say, 2022 up until the present, is looking at individual analysis of social media sites such as Instagram as a silo, Facebook as a silo, Reddit as a silo. And then using the same period, the exact same parameters or queries that you would be classified, that you use would be classified as the individual studies. And being able to roll that up would be the meta-analysis in aggregate. Okay. Well, this is from the Encyclopedia of Research Design, And you can see I pulled it on December 9th. It's not purporting to define the term then. Are you saying that this is not the way that meta-analysis is defined in the research world? Fritz objects. In the research world, we use it in that way that I just defined it, or the way that Governski says, yeah, okay. Witness says, yeah. Governski seemed to cut her off then. Governski, what authorities do you have for the way that you define meta-analysis? We've used it at Ipsos. We've used it at Nielsen. And this is not just in the US, but in global studies in the US, China, parts of Asia, for doing individual analysis across social media sites. And then looking at making sure that certain variables hold true, which are things like the keywords or the parameters or the queries. Looking at the exact same time frame and aggregating and doing a roll-up analysis. I see. So as you use the term meta-analysis, it's based on what you've done in your career. Objection. Yes. But it's a different definition than in this encyclopedia that I showed you. I would argue that it's not different. Some of the individual verbiage may be different because it says study. So I would argue that a study of Instagram, a study of Facebook, a study of Reddit would be exactly similar to what they're talking about here. But the study was just data from each of those, right? That's a quantitative study. See, now this expert is starting to show expertise. I'm really confident now that maybe the first 2 hours of the deposition were rather bumpy, to say the least, and didn't fill me with confidence. But now I'm starting to see her kind of, settle down into this, and it's looking better now. Governski. Okay, so it's your testimony that a meta-analysis also strike that. It's your testimony that when the definition of meta-analysis here refers to studies, it also means the combination of different data sets. I agree with the fact that it says individual studies, and those could be qualitative or quantitative. And then it talks about the combining or being combinable. Okay, when you talk about your definition of meta-analysis, can you provide me with any academic citation that supports that definition? Offhand, no, not readily available. Okay, let's go to opinion 5 in your report. My colleague will share that again. Can I just go back a little bit, actually, right? That last answer from the witness, when she's asked, can you provide me with any academic citation that supports that definition? And she says offhand, no. Those are the parts where I expected to not have answers for that, because she may not have been anticipating that question. That's not to say the question is unreasonable or not a fair one. I think it is. But would she have been expected to have collated, academic citations for specific term definitions? Probably not. Where I have an issue is that she's not remembering things, just to clarify, because I've had a few people say, well, I wouldn't remember, this, that, and the other either, is where is her own report. She should know it inside out. Because it's her report. And yes, I do think personally, and maybe this is just a high expectation, but because of my own legal background and my own research background, I would expect her to be able to remember why she cited sources. If in preparation for this deposition, that's something that should have been prepared for, and it shouldn't have taken much preparation either, because again, it's her report. And this is the distinction between what I expect her to know personally and what is perfectly reasonable that she can't answer or doesn't have. So just to I thought it was a good teaching moment there. Okay, so back to Governski. Okay, let's go to opinion 5 in your report. My colleague will share that again. Where you have opinion 5 and you say, and she reads, cross-platform meta-analysis confirmed synchronous timing across all 5 platforms, peak activity within 48 to 72 hours, proportional distribution stability, and identical decay patterns. I have no idea what any of that means. This is paragraph 169. When opinion 5 refers to a meta-analysis, that's describing the analysis you just described, which looks at your data set, right? I'm sorry, I found it. Can you just repeat the question again? Sure. When opinion number 5 refers to a meta-analysis, you're describing the analysis we just discussed, which was your analysis of your data set, right? That is correct. Okay. And when I refer to your data set, that's the 40, is it 42 or 43? Because I've seen in other places it's 43,992, but here she's saying 42,992 items, right? And the witness does not correct her. Yes, the complete data set that I submitted, yes. When I refer to your data set, you'll understand that I'm referring to that universe, that 42,995. Is it 42,992 or 42,995? See, now Governski is now making mistakes. I'm referring to that 42,009. I'm just going to go with what's written down. Right, that I'm referring to that universe, that 42,995, so I don't have to keep repeating that. Yes. Okay, so you opined that your data set showed, and then she reads, synchronous timing across all 5 platforms based on peak activity within 48 to 72 hours. What does synchronous timing mean? So it was timing that was on par. Sorry. If you look at like a bell curve, right? Thinking of synchronous of the center of the bell curve. So it was where most of the activity took place, which was in the normal, sorry, I shouldn't say normal, in the on average hours of when posting takes place for that particular time zone. So the synchronous timing didn't refer to the time period of 48 to 72 hours. Objection. So for UTC, which is how I do the data stamp, it looks at a specific period of time when the posts were posted. And there is usually a 48 to 72 hour time frame for any oddities for when the data in the data set ensures that it's available. So usually when I do the analysis, I would look at a 48 to 72 hour time frame to make sure that there is no outliers. Okay. And so you consider anything posted within 48 to 72 hours to be synchronous. As part of this analysis, yes. What about other analysis? Within the context of this analysis for social media, then yes. So in any analysis of social media, 48 to 72 hours is considered synchronous. I can only talk about this particular analysis within these confines. There is a myriad of different social media analysis and different ways of looking at things, but in this context, yes. Okay, but so you could define synchronous in different ways depending on what you're looking at. Objection. Depending on the domain and what you are trying to analyze, yes. So there is not like a standard definition of what it means to be synchronous. Objection. I believe in context, it is standard. So within this context, I do believe there is a standard definition. I don't understand how there is a standard definition, but only in this context. Can you explain that? Objection. If we were talking about social media data in the medical field or in finance, there is arguably, and that is outside of my purview, there's arguably different ways of looking at synchronization, the same way as I know that there is different ways of looking at forensics and tracking in those domains. So if I wanted to know which domain, how different domains define synchronous, where would I look? I don't know. You would have to be a subject matter expert, assumingly in that domain. Got it. So only an expert could determine what synchronous means in any given context. Objection. An expert would be the first person I would ask. Yes. So if I wanted to find literature to support that 48 to 72 hours was synchronous, where could I look? Objection. I don't know. I just have to ask you. In this context, objection. If I'm the expert, then yes. Huh? Let's go to paragraph 97, where the report explains that the 3-day period was between August 6th and 9th. How did you pick those dates? What paragraph? Paragraph 97. You can go to, keep going down, Autumn. My paragraph 97. Sorry, let's go to paragraph 36. It's miscited in my outline. Paragraph 36 says, and then she reads, all 5 platforms exhibit virtually simultaneous activity surges between August 6th and 9th. Is that right? Yes. You described this 2 to 3 day period as tight temporal synchronization, right? I did. That's based on the definition that you just provided from your experience? Yes. Okay, and if we go up to paragraph 33, just a couple of paragraphs above this, where you state that, and then she reads, analysis of posting activity in August of 2024. And you explain some of the data, and you say, and then she reads, this increase was so unusual that statistically speaking, it would occur by chance less than once if you observed 100,000 random pieces of data. Is that accurate? Yes. Okay. And then the next paragraph says that, and she reads, the August 2024 posting represents an exceptional departure from typical patterns. Is that your testimony? Yes. I should probably have caveated it for social media, but yes. Okay. And it's your opinion that the August 2024 spike was, quote, and she reads, not a random fluctuation, but rather an extraordinary event requiring explanation. Right? That's your opinion. Objection. Yes, it is. So why does the August 2024 spike require explanation? I would say it requires explanation because one would wonder what caused the spike. So you look at data points around that time period specifically in order to ideally explain what caused it. Okay, let's look at the next paragraph. You say, and she reads, the August 2024 posting activity represents an exceptional departure from typical patterns. And then could you please go down, Autumn? And you say, the fact that this spike occurred across multiple platforms simultaneously. So when you use the term simultaneously, does that mean the same thing as that 48 to 72 hour window that we talked about earlier? Yes. 48 to 72 hours from, August. I don't have the date in front of me, but yes. Okay. So you use the term simultaneous, which could also mean synchronous, okay? And then she reads, the fact that this spike occurred across multiple platforms simultaneously coinciding with the film's release date suggests a connection between these events. However, while the statistics confirm something significant happened in August 2024, additional analysis would be needed to definitively establish that the film caused this increase rather than simply occurring at the same time. So does that paragraph that I just read out loud accurately summarize your opinion? Objection. I'm sorry, can you just tell me what paragraph you're on? Yep, paragraph 34. It's right on the screen. The fact that this spike occurred across multiple platforms right there? Yes. So that those sentences, the fact that ending in at the same time accurately summarizes your opinion? Yes. Objection. What I put in the report does. Okay. So you have not definitively established whether the film's release is what caused the August 2024 spike, right? Definitively? No. Well, you used the word definitively, right? Right. So I just wanted to answer it in the same context. So definitively, no. Okay. Okay. You would need additional analysis in order to make a definitive conclusion, right? Having a definitive conclusion would be, number one, very difficult, even if I had a forensics background. So that's why I say definitive is usually not something that you would get even from a sophisticated data analysis or computational science analysis, because there are so many events that are unknowns that you would have to take into account. So based on what is accessible, which is news cycles, which is public commentary, public information, I was able to associate the spike with the news cycle, the launch of the film itself. Okay. But you chose to use these words, that an additional analysis would be needed to definitively establish that the film release caused this increase rather than simply occurring at the same time. Objection. Right? Definitively, yes, that is correct. And you did not perform that additional analysis that would be needed to definitively establish that the film release caused this increase rather than simply occurring at the same time, right? I did not do an analysis of correlation to definitively prove the spike was the outcome of the film launch. I wonder why she didn't do that. I hope we get to that answer, because otherwise that looks like it could be a problem. What does correlation mean? Correlation means that there is a connection between what happened and the outcome. Okay, and that is different from causation? Objection. So correlation and causation are different. So you didn't perform a causation analysis, right? I did not in this instance, no. Okay, let's turn to paragraph 37, which I think should be the next paragraph. You see paragraph 37 where it talks about proportional platform distribution? Do you see that? I do. It says, and then she reads, the distribution of activity across the platforms during August 2024 closely matched baseline proportions. What do you mean when you say baseline proportions? So the baseline we established and discussed earlier, which was May, June, July. What if your May, June, July dataset was incomplete? How would the proportional analysis change? Objection. I'm not sure what you mean by incomplete. What if you determined that you were missing a set of data from May, June, and July? How would that change your proportional analysis? So the reason I chose to analyze data across 5 platforms was to mitigate any issues with not having sampling from the key social media sites that I use globally, but specifically in the US. Okay, but my question is, if it turns out that the few hundred posts that you had from TikTok, the 688 posts from TikTok were just the ones you happened to capture, but really there were 20,000 items on TikTok, wouldn't that end up changing your proportion for your subsequent analysis? So I would have to look at the data in order to know that, because again, I'm scraping the public posts that are available, because private posts obviously are not available as part of the API. So I would have to look to see if additional data, again with the same parameters, with the same time frame, if there would be any difference But on average, because I'm looking at not just one site, but 5 different sites, this should mitigate any issues, or I should be able to capture if there is any issue in a particular social media site, having odd spikes or things of that nature. But you're analyzing a proportion based on the proportion that existed during the baseline period, right? Based on a data set during that time period, yes. My question is, if your data set was not complete, if it missed certain posts from certain activities, wouldn't your proportion change? So the net new data set that you're hypothetically talking about would have to completely skew completely differently than the data set that I was able to pull based on the raw data on that platform. So the chances of that is relatively small. But I'm not asking you the chances of it. I'm asking you if it turns out that, say, the scraper you use for TikTok turned out not to scrape everything, and that really there was a different universe of TikTok posts that you did not capture, wouldn't that alter the proportion that you were using for your future analysis? Objection. And then Governski continues then. I don't think this should be all that complicated. Like, if a data set for TikTok increases, wouldn't that change your proportionality? Objection. To answer your question, the data set would have to be completely different than the data set that I pulled. And directionally, that wouldn't make sense because, again, it's a randomized poll based on those keywords. So you're getting a sampling of the parameters that I've selected, the keywords, and it's a random sample of the raw data that's reflective of that. So you wouldn't get, with the same time frame, with the same keywords, you shouldn't have completely different raw data that wasn't represented in the initial poll. So I'm asking in the hypothetical, if what you called a random sample turned out to be under-inclusive, wouldn't that alter your proportionality analysis? Objection. I don't see how that's possible with the way that a scraper pulls from the raw data API. So I can't give you, I'm sorry, I can't give you a yes or no based on a hypothetical. So let's just take this out of this report. If you were to determine proportionality based on 10 to 2, okay, like 10 posts on X and 2 posts on Reddit, but it turned out that there weren't really 2 posts on Reddit, there were 100, wouldn't your proportionality analysis change as between 10 and 2 and 10 and 100? Technically, that is always true because there are many other posts that we do not see because they are private. So, for instance, all of this is dependent on, number one, you're scraping a smaller amount of data than actually exists because you're scraping public posts. So you've already shrunk the universe down to what is public versus private. So if it is based on the same keywords, then there should be the same direction proportionality. Okay, so how do you reconcile saying that you've shrunk this down to publicly available posts with your testimony that it's a random sample? I'm just trying to understand, does your dataset reflect a random sample, or does it reflect the universe of all public terms that hit on your search terms? Objection. It is a random sample of all public posts across each of the social media sites. You can only scrape and can only have access to data that is public and not private. Okay, but it's a sample. It's not everything that was publicly available. It is everything that Apify, let me rephrase that actually, because Apify has access to the API. It is everything that the API across each of the social media networks allowed Apify to have access to. Okay, how do you know that? I know how APIs work for APIs in general, but you didn't use APIs, you used scrapers. Objection. So the scraper is Apify's terminology. They scrape through an API. So in one instance, Instagram has an API. They allow access to their API which connects to a raw dataset for companies such as Apify, Sprout Social, a myriad of different organizations or content creators to scrape from. Meaning that they say Instagram, for instance, says, this is all the public posts based on the keywords that you have chosen. We are going to allow you access to be able to pull that data. So when I say that it's everything that Instagram, Reddit, YouTube, etc. gave access to, it simply means of the public data they say this is whatever the confines that they decide as a social media site. This is the APIs that they have available for you to pull from. Okay, so it's your testimony that every actor on Apify acts the way you just described. Objection. I don't know how every actor on Apify operates. Did you look at how the specific Apify actors that you used operate? The ones that I used, yes. There are ones that I did not use that they have. So you understand how each of these 4 specific scrapers work? Yes. Okay. And it's your testimony that these 4 specific scrapers captured all of the publicly available data that hit on your search terms during the January 2024 and to October 2025 time period. No, that's not what I said. Okay, say it again, please. Objection. Social media platforms give access to third parties such as Apify through their API. Based on the keywords, I'm able to ask Apify to go in and quote unquote scrape the API based on the time period and the keywords. Therefore, Apify and I have access to whatever the social media platforms have allowed them to have access to. So you don't know what the social media platforms have allowed the Apify actors to have access to. I don't know what constraints, if any, social media sites put on their APIs. Okay, so it's possible that they only allow Apify to access a small amount of the data that would have hit on your search terms, right? Objection. So no, that's not what I would say. Apify would have the same access as Sprout Social or any other assuming third party. What I mean is that I don't, of the universe that Instagram, as an example, has access to give or public posts, I'm simply saying they can put constraints the same way as YouTube can, the same way as X can, on what is available to be harvested from the API. Right. And so you don't know what those constraints are. Objection. I do not. And your Appendix C says that you use the YouTube data API. Is that right? Yes. So you didn't use Apify for YouTube. So I used the API first, just because I think in general it's ideal. If for whatever reason it wasn't available, I used Apify. If the APIs were not available, you used Apify. Yes. So sometimes APIs can simply be down. They can be sensitive. They cannot run for a myriad of reasons. You might just be 500th in the queue versus in Apify or Sprout Social. That could be number 1 in the queue. Okay, you just used what was available to you at the time when you were ready to scrape, right? Yes, I used the best source available to what I had access to. Okay, let's go to report paragraph 22, where you say, and she reads, data was collected through publicly available application programming interfaces or authorized data scraping tools between January 2024 and October 2025. So I'm trying to understand, did you run the tools during the entire time period, or you ran the tools to capture information from that time period? I ran the tools to capture information from that time period. Okay, so and you didn't run the tools, right? Your assistant ran the tools. My assistant, Taylor Hunter, ran the tools. I double checked the tools. I am also the one who ran the API scrape. Sorry, the YouTube API scrape. When did those tools run? October 2025. On a single day or no? over the course of, so each of the platforms ran on a single day, but each platform ran on a subsequent day. So I'm just giving this as an example. This is not the specifics. YouTube ran on Monday, Twitter ran on Tuesday, and so on and so forth. Got it. So you ran each network on a single day, but not all on the same day. Correct. And you produced to us your backup data, right? Yes. And I'm going to stop there and get ready to do part 7. I think we're getting close to the end. I feel more confident now with how the expert is explaining things. And also, you know, Meryl Governski is making many mistakes herself. You know, she is trying to take the witness to paragraphs that turn out to be the wrong paragraph, or they are wrongly cited. So, you know, just to sort of demonstrate that, you know, they're both experts in what they do, but they both make mistakes. All right. So, yeah, part 7 coming up.